I will say this just before we begin officially. It's probably the most fun month I think I've had. First of all, these presidents are amazing because they, rather than sort of being like, oh, like let me give my normal remarks or let me do the way that lecture style or anything like that. They're like, oh yeah, we'll flip the panel. We'll answer. If you go to the bit.ly Nerding with Presidents link, there's all these questions that we try to create beforehand to flip the panel. They're like, oh, we'll answer questions beforehand. Like the coolest, probably 3 presidents I've ever met to really think about how to even make things like this more interactive. So again, it's been amazing to have them to collaborate with. So if you want to read more, preferably not during now, but afterwards, feel free. The first question that I'd asked each of them were, one was, what is your 6-word story? Just a little bit. We don't go into the full bio, but would love to go around and have each of you share your lovely 6-word stories with the crowd, because I think it really reflects who you guys are as presidents and as human beings. So.
Can I just start by saying it's International Women's Day today? I decided not to walk off the panel, but I am wearing red anyway. My 6-word story was first gen, fierce feminist, American dream.
Great. President Decatur.
Okay. So I have chemist college president, really Jedi wannabe.
That's great.
He created the life he sought.
That's nice. That's really good. Mine pales in comparison. Mine would be banker turned educator, Chinese parents confused. But awesome. And we had one other really fun one that I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you guys to talk about. We asked what their first album was, the record they ever owned. I thought that would be interesting before we go into the heavy stuff. But would love, and we asked also what format. So we'll start reverse from Dan all the way to Kathleen. First record and what format?
Classic vinyl, and it was Elton John's album Madman Across the Water.
Mm.
It's a vinyl 45, Jackson 5, I Want You Back.
Meet the Beatles, definitely vinyl, right after the Ed Sullivan appearance.
It's great. It's great. Mine was definitely a Backstreet Boys CD, but awesome. Well, the topic, as you can all see, is Liberal Arts 2.0, the role of colleges in society, the current and future role. I would love, I think in this conversation, vocabulary and definitions are incredibly important. So just as a baseline, would love, and feel free we can go in whatever order. What's your definition of what liberal arts is? Maybe we can start with Dan and move this way. But
Well, I think that liberal arts education is a tradition of education that acknowledges that students have a wide range of potential interests and capabilities, callings and passions, that the world in which humanity lives has enormous complexity and richness to it, and that liberal arts education is about respecting the multiplicity of forms of knowledge, of experience, of culture, of value, the enduring questions and new questions. Liberal arts education is about being open to following ideas and thoughts where they lead, because there's an intrinsic meaning and value in doing that, in addition to there being some, practical and instrumental value in developing real intellectual strength and capability.
President Decatur.
Yeah. And I fall back on the classical definition of liberal arts, which is really the education that was intended to prepare one for engaged citizenship in the broader world. And I very much see the liberal arts tradition aimed at educating graduates who go on to be able to address and help to solve some of the world's problems, to engage with each other as citizens, to think not only in terms of one's individual success and the way one evolves and develops as an individual, but to think in a broader social context and how one fits in with the community, preparing one to take on positions of leadership, whether it's leadership in a civic sense, whether it's leadership in a sense of business or in an organization, but to give the skills that are needed, the communication skills, analytical, creative skills that allow that to happen.
I would define it as education across the disciplines with the goal of fostering specific capacities. And a lot of these capacities and habits of minds have been mentioned by Sean and Daniel. I guess I would add more reasoning to that list, but certainly, communication, learning how to work with diverse people. These are very important capacities that I think are developed well at liberal arts institutions.
Great. Does anybody have a better definition than even what's provided? I thought that was really complete, but would love to talk a little bit about this other topic of, we did some prep before in the last few weeks in preparation for this panel, and the theme that came about was the myth and reality of, we always want to create like mythbusters for liberal arts, but the myth and reality of liberal arts. Maybe would love going the other way around, starting with President McCartney, just what are, I know you each had 3 myths, but pick one that you believe is one myth of liberal arts and sort of what is the actual reality of what a liberal arts education means. And then after that, we'll actually go back into you guys and have you guys dig a little deeper into that. So President McCartney, what's one myth of liberal arts?
Well, let me just say, I think one of the things that's interesting about myths is why they exist. Because the liberal arts have always been sought after by students and their parents, and yet maybe from the beginning they've been contested. And I think one of the reasons for that might be that there is this tension between the disciplines themselves and what one is meant to get from an education, which is a career. So that is clearly a false dichotomy. In fact, in many schools provide opportunities for experiential learning in collaboration with pure discipline-based learning. So I will choose that myth.
And I think often in colloquial conversation and in the broader media, the liberal arts gets reduced down to the humanities. So this notion, kind of equation of liberal arts equals humanities, and it becomes very personal in the sense when folks ask me what my discipline is, and I explain that I'm a chemist, and it's sort of, well, how can you be president of a liberal arts college as a chemist? There's something wrong with that equation. And I think that in reality, the sciences, whether you think about natural sciences or social sciences, are very much ingrained in the liberal arts tradition, that the connections that develop between the study of the natural sciences and the studies of the humanities and the arts and social sciences creates a particularly rich combination. And if you look in terms of outcomes, often in leadership in science, technology, engineering, there are liberal arts roots of folks who go on to leadership positions, whether it's in academic science and research or whether it's in industry and in technology development. And so for me, that myth of the false dichotomy of STEM on one side and liberal arts on the other, actually it's the intersection combination that's really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Well, yeah, I guess the obvious myth is that liberal arts graduates don't get jobs. So I think we can all completely dismiss that. We surveyed our 2015 graduates 6 months after graduation, and 99% were working full-time or studying in a graduate program full-time. But the myth, I think, that's a little more interesting that I hadn't thought of, but the comment made me think about it, is that liberal arts is owned by liberal arts institutions, liberal arts colleges. I think it's really important to demolish that myth, that every institution, from an open access, large public institution to a trade school, to a culinary school, to a charter school, to anything, all schools, all educational programs should reach into the tradition of liberal arts in order to allow the students to find their passion for aspects of humanity that speak to them. And that, so that when we play defense on the liberal arts by pointing to how amazing our communities are, which is good, because I think they are really fantastic places to learn and grow, sometimes we miss the chance to challenge society to invest in liberal arts education for a much wider group of students, including adult learners, including kids at a very young age.
Yeah, it's the thing that made me think about it was liberal arts isn't a college, but a mindset. It's a general mindset about an approach. So yeah, again, thank you for tying the audience. We're connecting the stages together. At this point, does anyone have any questions on these two topics of myth, of definition? we'll go to the Slido, but didn't want to move on to another topic. Is there anywhere you would like any of the presents to go deeper on? Yes, please. I'm guessing the short answer is yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
And I can say that there are powerful works of literature, powerful works of art, important texts that come from history, philosophy, biology, economics as well, that at times speak to both the nature of what it means to be human and the nature of what it means to be part of a society and how we explain and talk about the natural world. And I very much see the importance of the educational experience, the liberal arts educational experience, is to convey that, to give folks an understanding to grapple with those fundamental questions. And there are reasons why some texts have lasted through time. It's because often they are places that deal in those fundamental questions on a level that is sort of truly profound and deeply moving. And so I think we could generate a very long list of things that are important for, certainly important questions for students to deal with, and important works of art, text, ways to engage in that.
Yeah. I think there's what to read, there's also how to read, and that we change as readers over time. Some texts then become almost like signposts of our own growth as we reread them and see how we see them differently. And I'm thinking, for me, the college experience of reading sophomore year Absalom, King Lear, and Invisible Man twice. Sophomore year I read it, and then senior year I read it, all three books and text. And amazing, just even in 2 years, to sense another level of analysis that I was capable of because of the classes I had taken. Mm-hmm. And so the affective experience of revisiting those works and the sense of growth and freedom that I felt from having a mind capable of moving is to me as important as the sort of actual nature of what the book is. And I think all students deserve the opportunity to have that kind of affective, intellectual moment of growth and transcendence. That's what education should be about in a very deep way, I think.
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to take a couple of, I'm going to mash up the top 12 voted. Well, there's 3 questions, but I think they're all along the same theme. And if you ask the question and you feel like it's not being captured, feel free to speak up. We're in person. The question kind of builds on what you all were talking about with respect to liberal arts isn't practical. So could you talk a little bit about, there's the liberal arts sense of learning how to learn, and then this idea of this life, just having these knife skills, as I would think about it, for the rest of your life. But you're getting a couple questions that are saying, well, I need to learn my technical skill sets. I need to learn how to code. The competency ed, boot camps, sort of where does, I know there's initiatives happening actually on all your campuses, so maybe you can give some concrete examples. And I don't think it's an either or, it's a both and, but those are the kinds of questions that are coming up. It's, I want to study this, I want to study philosophy, but to get my first job, I need to know how to code. Where does liberal arts fit into that, and how is that maybe being illuminated on your campuses? Does that make sense to the question? Yeah. Do you want to start?
I'll go first. Yeah, I think when we look at our students and what they studied and where they end up, it's very interesting to me. Like, we might have a student who majored in classics who's working on Wall Street, for example. Now, do I think majoring in classics prepared that person for Wall Street? I really do, because it cultivated the kinds of capacities and habits of mind that really prepared her for that career. So that's one thing. I don't think you have to, major in business in order to go to business school. We all know that. That said, we really believe in experiential learning at Smith, and we know that our students really love it, sort of hands-on. And some of that happens really in the classroom. We have these programs of study that we call concentrations, where you can do one in museum studies. And that means you're going to take some courses in art history and even in chemistry. But you're going to have a summer praxis internship, that kind of thing. So we believe in that too. And then we extend that to the co-curriculum. So we have an innovation lab with business competitions, and we have a design thinking lab, completely optional. But a lot of the students end up using that, using those labs actually for course projects. So I think they're easy to integrate. But I don't think we should get fixated on this major leads to, this kind of career path, because we have all seen, another student, an alum that I met, she majored in art history and she's running a construction company. She would tell you that her training in art history prepared her for running that company.
Well, and I sort of agree with everything with everything Kathy just said. We had a panel on campus about a year ago of alums who were currently working in the finance industry, who came back to talk to current students about pathways into finance. And I think our students were shocked in that of the 8 alums who were on stage, there was 1 economics major that was there. Everyone else was an English major, art history major, international studies major, kind of all over the map. And so, I think there's no correlation between what one studies and then what one goes on to do. I think also what's important to get out of a college education isn't necessarily the specific skill set that might immediately translate into something after graduation. So using coding as an example, because in all likelihood, the coding that you're going to learn now is going to be completely irrelevant within 6 months after the time you graduate. As someone who spent a lot of time learning Fortran in college, I can tell you that it is, it's those skills actually go away very quickly. I think what we're interested in is integrating, I think the best that you get from a liberal arts education, which is that sense of how do you learn how to learn, how do you develop the flexibility to adapt to changes that are happening in the world around you, and recognizing that lots of things are going to change about the world, and being prepared to stay on top and stay in front of that, with an opportunity to gain enough practical experience where you can have that first job after graduation. And so that includes a lot of work in, for example, community-based learning. So what are ways we can partner courses with businesses and organizations to give some hands-on experiential learning as part of the education experience. It includes using internships and other opportunities off campus to complement what goes on in the classroom and build those bridges between the classroom experience and out-of-classroom experience. But I think it's keeping in mind that the core take-homes from the education are never going to be those very narrow practical skills, because those are going to be out of date almost instantly.
Yeah. Those are 2 comments that I think that many in our field would really echo, and Kenyon and Smith are especially powerful at propelling students into opportunity, whatever they want to do. It doesn't, propelling them into leadership. So I won't say the same about F&M. We are that, but let me just talk about 2 innovations that maybe speak to the point. The first is that our faculty chose to revise our core general education curriculum a few years ago, and really honed in on the question of what should a student learn at Franklin and Marshall College in her 4 years, and what should she be able to do with that education. And it was exciting for me as a new president to walk into the conversation and see how committed the faculty were to developing 2 new intro-level courses that would allow students really to develop specific skills, intellectual skills, that would help them make the most of their college experience and be able to develop skills that the faculty had assessed would be valuable in their personal and professional lives afterwards. So there was that, which the details I could share later, but that was so great to see the faculty committed to that within the context of being committed to a liberal arts education. And then secondly, one way to help the person ask the question about how can I take some technical courses and also take some courses that are going to speak to me in a personal way. Advising is very important in a college setting. A lot of big schools don't advise well. The schools that we are at, advising is usually done by the faculty. But we also all have different versions of career centers. Ours is called the Office of Student and Postgraduate Development, because we're really trying to engage with students early and then for at least 5 years after they graduate. Like a 10-year zone of impact. And in that advising part, can help students tell you, the things they want to study in life, the things they want to do maybe in summer internships and first jobs, and help them find ways to do some skill development outside of the curriculum, which could be summer courses, which certainly could be internships, could be doing some, some funded research projects that we have. But the key is to be talking with students early, not just leaving them alone to try to, navigate the combination of practical and intrinsically meaningful, but to listen to them, share with them ideas, connect them to alums and to faculty so that they can start to develop their own roadmap to, successful college education.
Great. Yeah. Would love to take, and I think we captured some of it in the top Slido questions, but on this topic of liberal arts 2.0, future of liberal arts, maybe I'll take 3 to 4 as a basket of questions, and we'll tackle them together. First question, transcripts, how do we think about credentialing and signaling what students are learning as a package to employers and other people? Anyone else? 2, 3 other questions, we'll bundle them together. And yeah, why don't you guys are welcome to tackle whichever in what order, but just because to also prioritize the upvotes, it seemed like that question on rebranding is a nice maybe first tie, and maybe we'll start there, and then I can remind you of the other 2 questions on the rebranding of liberal arts. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I think there's a tremendous amount of, if you believe in markets, which is the only way I look at things, but if you believe in markets, the decline of some majoring in the humanities is something to worry about. On the other hand, we have tremendously strong student interest and student demand, and we have tremendously strong student outcomes. And I have a really dedicated, committed community of students and alums, along with, of course, the faculty and staff of the school. And so while there is a lot of, I guess I'll just say, negative buzz in society about the lack of instrumentality, supposedly, in some institutions like mine, at the level of actual people's experience, my students are happy. My alums are very employed. My mid-career alums have got fantastic salaries, ranked very high. My faculty love the kids. And as we've become much more inclusive over the past 5 years, it's only gotten better. So I'm not even 100% sure that I want to take the point that there's a massive communications problem. I realize some people may experience that as a problem, but right now, I'm not. I will try to answer questions people have and make them feel better about what they don't think they believe about this tradition. But at the actual campus level, it is working. And our demand is, we've had the 3 years highest applications ever consecutively, by 30% higher than before. And just to pick up that question so I address it, maybe the transcripts will evolve in time. But when you have 99% of your young graduates all working within 6 months full-time, or all in graduate school full-time, and they're all going on to graduate schools when they're ready to, we don't have the same pressure to move to a credentialing model that maybe some other institutions or different types of schools do. We haven't had our students asking for that. We haven't had our faculty calling for that. We did review the curriculum and make a lot of changes. The big thing we've done that speaks to your point is in our Office of Student and Postgraduate Development. We don't call them career coaches, but I'll just use that term. Our advisors are really working with the students to help them develop resumes and a vocabulary so they can do what you're saying. It's not a certificate, of course, not a credential list, but we do spend now a considerable amount of time helping students with their translational abilities so that they can speak to employers that may not intuitively get what they've just studied.
President McCartney or Gator?
Well, I would say this about transcripts. I'm not sure we can get the kind of information on there that would be helpful, and I think that's what Dan was essentially saying. But a good resume should flesh out the transcript, letters of recommendation, and then, of course, the interview process itself hopefully will allow employers to probe for the kind of information that they're interested in. With respect to the need to rebrand, I think that's probably right, and it's back to what people's preconceptions are about a liberal arts institution. I mean, we are called liberal arts colleges. However, I used to teach at Harvard, and if you look at the Harvard undergraduate experience, it is much like what we do. If you go to the Harvard College admissions page, you'll see that they talk about providing a liberal arts education. What's different between what we do and what they do is, they might have bigger classes, they might have more teaching done by doctoral students, but it's basically the same approach to what we all have decided is a good education. What stands at odds with the big Research One universities and what we do are really engineering schools and some undergraduate business schools, which are much more focused towards careers. That's really the comparison. So the vast majority of American students in higher education are going to some institution that offers a liberal arts curriculum. So yeah, we probably need to do a better job of explaining what it is and what it isn't.
Great. John?
And maybe to build off of that, I do think that we, and I think sort of our institutions, our sector, has been a bit too passive, and in many ways, I think there's been the assumption that, of course, everyone knows that a liberal arts education is valuable. Why do we actually have to go make the case, right? I think that's been something that's characterized our sector for some time, and I've seen a change in the past few years of a much stronger, assertive statement of why our education is valuable, including, I think, as Dan was referring to, being able to point to what our outcomes are. And to talk about what the outcomes are from a liberal arts education. If you think you go back 15 to 20 years, it would be unheard of, I think, for a president of a small liberal arts college to talk about what the job placement ratios are like, kind of going of 15 months out, a few years out. I think now that's something; those are numbers that we all know, and they are important to us, and we know that they're important for families to understand. Some of that is tied into the idea that as education becomes more expensive, it's a completely reasonable question for families to ask, what's the return on investment, and what are you getting on the other side? I actually think the data are very much on our side in terms of whether you look at it in terms of job success, or whether you look at it in terms of civic engagement, whether you look at it in terms of personal satisfaction. Our outcomes are all good. We just historically haven't made that part of the story. And that's one way to think about what I think the rebranding has to be, is we need to actually just talk about that more as part of the narrative of what makes this education powerful.
One of the things that we're trying to do a lot, and I'm still not in love with the word rebrand, only because I think of rebrand as changing the brand, where I think that describing, explicating what the brand offers is a little bit different. Yeah. So the dominant way of discussing the value of higher education, it does involve essentially sort of the kind of the, I guess I'll just say, the tyranny of a data-driven assessment of value. Now, I'm all for data. So, but there's another way to evaluate value too. It's through another lens, the lens of journalism or anthropology or literature or culture, which is explication, to be able to draw deeper into individual or group experience in order to evaluate and describe the dynamics of growth that young people experience in a catalyzing education. That kind of communication is sometimes called anecdotal. Understandably, the people that call it anecdotal tend to be the people that really value the kind of public policy analysis that no doubt you value too. But can we be successful at teasing out through thick description and through the stories of students who are meaning makers some of the qualitative differences of this kind of education? I know we can do it. Will people listen? I hope so. We're trying in my institution, but I think that's part of it too.
Yeah. I would just say one quick. Go ahead, John. You go first.
Oh, well, I was actually going to say, can I take on the last question that was asked?
Yeah. Let me. I have one small thing. I think it addresses your point on transcripts and rebranding. I think the onus is also on the college to teach their students how to talk about their degree, how to talk about liberal arts, giving them the tools to express to employers what they've learned. That they haven't learned critical thinking through only learning English 101, but through these things, these other, like, how do you create a vocabulary? Because right now I think there's two opposite ends of the spectrum. There's like the academic side, and then there's the employer side. I think creating a common vocabulary, at Minerva we have these things called habits of mind and foundational concepts. Having our students be able to talk about what are the critical components of critical thinking, I think is a piece. I know that's happening all across your colleges as well. So, and I think it empowers students themselves to create their own portfolios. They don't need a transcript. They're going to send their employer, here's my website. Here's like everything I've done. Here's all of my projects. Go look me up. Like these 5 people wrote about me. So it's an interesting, we're in a new world where it's not just a piece of paper, if that makes any sense. But Sean, please dig into this other piece, yeah.
Well, yeah, so I wanted to, the last question in that cluster about I think the political atmosphere and the sense of, and I would put it in the category of a myth, that there is not only political homogeneity, but a culture of indoctrination and sort of reprogramming that happens on our campuses, that if one listens to some state legislatures in some parts of the country, you think it's happening. I think that's completely wrong. And a couple of, we can look at this from 2 different perspectives. The first is that it's a core value of liberal arts education to actually have a diversity of viewpoints that are actively contested and challenged. And if anything, if you look at the history of American higher education in the past half century, it has been an incredible expansion of the diversity of viewpoints that are included, both from a curricular standpoint and as actual people in the classrooms, as students and faculty members. And so the very best teachers at our institutions, and I think the very best teachers at institutions more broadly, actually value and cultivate that exchange of ideas across diverse views, and it's something that's incredibly important. The other way to look at it is specifically in terms of some of the, I think not only broader rhetoric, but some of the political pressure being placed on state institutions, by state legislatures in some areas. And there, I do think there's a conflation of the idea that inclusion of broad voices within the curriculum and on campus is sort of inherently something which is a liberal bias. And that also I would just contest as being not the case and not demonstrable, so not demonstrable. I've heard too often the critique that, for example, the expansion of voices of what one includes in the literary canon, to include authors like Toni Morrison, means that somehow we are either watering down the strength of the canon or are capitulating to some sort of sense of political correctness, and not recognizing the fact that, Beloved is probably one of the most powerful pieces of art of the last 100 years, and so not to include it in the canon on campus would be a travesty, not something that is politically correct. And so I think we need to constantly remind folks that the value of our education is, in fact, by having many voices on campus, by having a diversity of views on campus. And I would actually argue that there is still a far wider range of views that are expressed on campuses now than if you go back half a century.
Great. We have 13 minutes and 47 seconds left. Let's do another round of questions. And just to flavor a little bit, since the other part of the topic is not only liberal arts 2.0, but the role of colleges in society, the role that it plays, and how those might inform each other. So just want to go around. We'll end with you. We'll start in the back.
We have something called Mindful Mondays, and we have a Wordle Center for Work and Life, and they bring, it's actually more of a talk. They bring in people who talk about how it is that they create some kind of equanimity in their own lives. So they talk about their practice. But we also have a Buddhist studies program, and there are people who lead sitting meditation. There's all kinds of things like that that happen on our campus. And I agree with you that it's just really important for students. I mean, especially for students who don't have religion in their lives, and a lot of our students don't have that. So I think this kind of approach to mindfulness, thinking about it, can be very grounding for students. And I think we can expect more. One of the things I'm fond of saying is that at any liberal arts institution, you're going to get, 4 excellently taught classes each semester. But what happens outside of the classroom is equally important. There are a lot of optional co-curricular offerings. And so it's really now, I think, beyond sports and beyond clubs, into just the kinds of activities that you're talking about. There's a lot more that I could say, but a good place to stop.
Yeah, that's great. Just a small addition there. I think your framing of the role of contemplative practices in liberal arts education, I think of Jesuit, product of Georgetown, like the Jesuit phrase of contemplation and action. Like this is, maybe we need a rebranding in the 21st century, but these are things that have existed for a while, right? It's like, how do you combine action with contemplation, all these things together? So I think these are things that are happening on college campuses, and it's maybe, I don't know, and I think students are eating it up. I think it's a good thing. Maybe it needs to be made more prevalent. So, but anyway, Dan or Sean, do you want to address the combo first two questions?
Yeah. Yeah, I can get started, especially since we've got a Kenyon alum. I think that we need to address the question both of affordability and access, right? And those in some ways are two different, two closely related but different things. On the affordability front, our biggest concern is the rise in growth of the cost of tuition over time, and what can we do to slow that growth and then really begin to bend the cost curve in some way. The biggest thing we can do on that front is to find ways to make ourselves more efficient as institutions. And I'm encouraged by the amount of collaboration that's beginning to happen among, especially among smaller institutions. In Ohio, the consortium of liberal arts colleges in Ohio, we call ourselves the Ohio Five, do an increasing number of things together as a unit. And I think that down the road, there's going to be more, for example, consolidation of our back office functions as a unit, because those are things that don't directly impact the student experience, and that there's really a lot of efficiency to be gained by doing those things at scale, and more resources directed to the student experience. And I know in Massachusetts, the 5 colleges in Massachusetts, from whom we both stole our name and modeled our consortium, have been doing that for some time. And I think that we're going to see that nationally as a model to try to make ourselves more efficient, to put more resources into the student experience without leading to the continual increase in cost. On the access front, I think we have to recognize that for institutions to for any of our institutions to become and stay strong places, academically strong places, we have to find places for talented students from a range of backgrounds, and that includes from a range of socioeconomic backgrounds. That there's a lot that's gained by having diversity and socioeconomic diversity on our campuses. The first thing that the first step in that is making it a priority for the institutions, for us to kind of recognize that there are great students for us to bring to campus. It's important for us to do that, and it strengthens the education for everyone. And then the second is to make sure that we're backing up that commitment and priority with the financial resources for financial aid. So what can we do to make for specific students, to make Kenyon more accessible? What can we do to support those students once they're on campus, recognizing that we need to create an environment in which all of the students feel included and empowered to pursue their own education, despite not having equal means or equal resources, equal family resources when they're on campus. And I know at least at Kenyon, that's a strong commitment that we have, and we want to drive that forward.
I just want to maybe add and build on both comments. So at Franklin and Marshall embarked upon a institution changing strategy 6 years ago, which we call the Next Generation Initiative. And what that involved was tripling our investment in need-based financial aid. And another question would be, where did the money from? But we tripled our investment in need-based aid, and then built partnerships with top schools, programs, scholarship programs, public systems, charter systems all around the country, in the service of what we framed as a talent strategy. And because of that talent strategy, we very quickly went from having about an average of 6% Pell Grant students coming in each year to now, just a few years later, a healthy 20%. The Next Generation Initiative has succeeded in many different ways, but the most important thing is that the students are thriving. The Pell students at Franklin and Marshall College have the same GPA as the student body as a whole. They have higher first, second year retention rates last year, higher 4-year graduation rate. Our kids who are first-gen kids and Pell Grant recipients are the ones winning the National Fellowship. The whole school has been lifted because of our talent strategy. So the myth, of course, is that low-income kids, are going to need all kinds of special help. And some may need individual support, like every student. But the bottom line is there are so many kids that have earned opportunity in this country that haven't been getting it. And the Next Generation Initiative has been our way of contributing to that national need. Now, as a last point, we've been working together in the last year to create a national alliance of institutions also committed to expanding opportunity for low-income kids who have earned it. And Kenyon is a partner along with F&M in it, and Smith is just about to become a partner in it. It's called the American Talent Initiative. It's funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies. And together, a group of institutions with high student success rates, with strong financial aid programs, have set a national goal of 50,000 more Pell-eligible students attending schools with 70% or higher graduation rates in 9 years. We're just in the first year. We just announced it. We're just moving forward. But I hope that what that will do is to create incentives for kids to know and believe that strong schools want them. And secondly, that on each campus we'll be able to drive up the percentage of modest or low-income students, benefiting all students, but also helping each other learn about strategies for promoting student success that maybe have worked at Kenyon or Smith that we hadn't thought about at F&M. And I think that's the standard to which higher education should be held, not just private, but public. 48 states have cut their funding to higher education. The cost shift to families is far greater in public education, unfortunately, across the country than it is in private education. The debt level of public educated kids in Pennsylvania is 11,000 more than kids at Franklin and Marshall College, despite our sticker price, which is more because we meet all students' financial needs. And at some level, it's incumbent upon society to put some pressure on all legislators, as well as on higher education, to invest in making college affordable.
Thanks, Dan. We got 3 minutes left, so the closing mini thing is a little more dreamlike, if you will. So we're in 2030. I think we can all agree colleges are not going anywhere. They're not going to crumble to the ground and just be sort of relics. I think there's changes that will happen, and I would argue liberal arts isn't going anywhere either. So I'm curious, what is one characteristic of your college of the future? It could be a made-up one. Just what is a characteristic? Obviously, there's many that you think is going to be unique in that college. You can feel free to a VR-infused sensory land, whatever it is that you want to say. But what is that component of that liberal arts college of the future?
I want to talk about an emerging student capacity, actually. And this is one that Howard Gardner has talked about in his book, 5 Minds for the Future. We are bombarded with information, and young people are too. And so if you're researching anything, you're trying to do 2 things. One is synthesize knowledge from a wide variety of sources. And the second is to figure out, what's a fact and what's an alternative fact, right?
Heard of that, yeah.
We are going to have to teach our students better with respect to media literacy. There's more I could say, but there's only 1 minute and 31 seconds left.
Great. Go on.
I like that one a lot, but I can't repeat it. So I would say also, I think the schools of the future are going to be even more diverse, and as an essential component is navigating how you communicate effectively around difference. And as we live in a world that's more polarized, making sure that that's part of the educational experience is that people from different perspectives and different backgrounds can actually collaborate, communicate, connect, understand, develop empathy.
That may be the most important thing. Just the demographics of the country will be radically different in 20 years in colleges. And interestingly, while they'll be radically different among those young people who are getting their education and going off to work, the demographics of the retirees whose Social Security and Medicare, if they exist, will be paid for by the younger workers will be very different. It will be like today and like the past. I wonder how this country will navigate the seriousness of demographic change. I really, truly wonder about that. I hope our schools have a part to play in that. Otherwise, I think that technology is going to run wild. and that, artificial intelligence will be doing things that we've never thought of today. And so the best schools will be the ones that empower human beings to get on top of technology, to direct technology to good uses, not bad uses, and to be able to preserve creativity, independent thought in a routinized, mechanized, technologically driven world. Hopefully brains will drive technology rather than technology driving brains.
Great. I'll leave you guys with one fact that we came across through the World Economic Forum. It basically framed it as the fourth industrial revolution, but many of you probably know this fact already or a projection rather. So they believe that leading over the next 5 years, there will be a net loss of over 5 million jobs in 15 major developed and emerging economies. I think that is even like an understatement in some ways. That not only leads to the undergraduate students we're talking about, it leads to the people who have jobs already and the role that I would frame as higher ed or post-secondary institutions have to re-educate. And I think I'm just excited by what you guys will come up with as well in those areas, in addition to the amazing education you're providing for your students right now. So thank you all for the time and for engaging, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you.